Welcome to the CMO Chapter podcast, where we dive deep into the dynamic world of Chief Marketing Officers. Join us as we explore the careers, insights, and strategies of top marketing executives who shape the brands we know and love. Whether you're a seasoned marketer, aspiring CMO, or simply just curious to understand what it really takes to step into the shoes of a CMO. This podcast is your backstage pass to discovering what it's like to really lead and innovate in the ever-evolving landscape of business. Stay tuned as we uncover the stories of the visionaries behind the brand. I am absolutely delighted today to be joined by one and only Liam Lonelack. Welcome.
Thank you, Lucy, for having me.
You're very, very welcome. So I met Liam, I don't know, it feels like a couple of years ago. We've had conversations, coffees, etc., kept in touch. And I felt that Liam was going to be the perfect person for this particular podcast because of various different reasons. He's had a fantastic career. Not only that, he comes across fantastically, charismatic. I feel like my listeners are going to get so much out of this conversation today.
No pressure,
super excited. putting you a little bit on a pedestal there. So Liam, I'm going to start with, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Liam. I'm currently in consulting or agency land. So I'm the Chief Commercial and Strategy Officer for an independent media and marketing agency called mould. Before then, I was client side for many years. So I was in CMO and broader commercial roles in financial services, FMCG, and then e-com. And then all the way back when I was a young buck with hopes and dreams, I was a lawyer back in the UK. So I've had an interesting career development to get to where I am today.
Right, there you go. So you were a lawyer before you got into marketing.
That's right. So I was an intellectual property lawyer, and if your listeners can tell from my accent, I'm guilty as charged as a POM. So I was in the UK, and I really enjoyed the study of law and fundamentally the relationships that people have with each other through the mechanism of the law and society as a whole. And I guess that's where my curiosity in, I suppose, relationships that people have with intangible things began. Like intellectual property is an intangible good, right? And a very valuable intangible good. And so I guess looking back, perhaps I was always a closet marketeer because at the end of the day, we are monetizing something that is intangible in many instances as marketeers.
Absolutely. So what? I've got to ask the big question. So why the change? What made you go into marketing?
Yeah, so I think there was a few reasons. If I look back now with the experience I have and with a bit of grey hair, which is always helpful for context, I think I realised that I enjoyed taking risk, and risk is something that lawyers are allergic to. That's not part of the profession. Their job, and they're experts at it, is to compartmentalize risk, manage that. Whereas I like to be thinking about, okay, yes, we need to manage it, but let's talk about the upside and the opportunity too. And so I felt, secondly, that I wasn't getting that buzz essentially, or that vibe, I guess, from working in a type of law practice that I was working in. Then I left actually without a job to go to, and so the first thing I learned in my life, I guess, when it came to my career was, if it doesn't feel right, you just got to act on it. And sometimes if you don't have a plan, that's cool too. And I didn't have a plan. Like, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I spent all this money on law school. I'd really poured my heart and soul into it, aged about 4,000 years. And I didn't have a plan, but I trusted the process. I actually fell into executive search and recruitment for a short time in London, really living the British stereotype. No further comments on that, Lucy. But so did that for a while, and then I fell into a multinational marketing agency, and it was a complete accident. But I ended up loving it. So that's a bit of the real story behind how I fell out of I
really like that you've just shared that with me. Thank you, because actually, I mean, Yeah, I didn't realize that you'd actually been a lawyer beforehand. And it's interesting because I've had a few CMOs and leaders that I've interviewed, and there's a common theme there, that something that resonates with me. If it doesn't feel right, you don't have to stay in it, And I think that comes down to, if you've got a leader that you're not gelling with, or it's a culture or a team, or whatever it is, there's always options, to some degree. So, is this when you were your first marketing role, going back a bit here? So this was in agency, was okay, yeah, yeah, this was in London. And so it wasn't long when you were in there before you then moved to Australia. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. So I was at Interpublic Group, which has now, of course, been acquired by Omnicom Media Group. So won't
Right.
exist in the medium term. So I was there, big American firm, and I loved the pace of agency and consulting life. And what I loved in particular was I felt like I understood clients in a way that other people in the agency business didn't, or at least I understood them differently, I guess. That probably came from my years of advocacy training and law, and coming at it genuinely from the angle of the business problem, the risk, and the upside. And agencies talk about, we care about the business outcome. They say that until the cows come home. But I guess I really meant it. And I was very ardent in my resolve to make sure that the things we were proposing to the client was absolutely fit what they required. And I guess that was distinctive. And I had a style which was quite progressive. I was probably a bit too cheeky in a few meetings, and I was very direct. And I think clients found that refreshing, or at least that was my outtake from it. That some probably found me quite annoying and precocious, but yeah, you can't be everyone's cup of tea, and I certainly learned that early on. And I guess I left the UK, so I was running the Amazon business for UK and Ireland, a great account. My boss was crazy enough to have promoted me like 6 times in like 4 years, and that was awesome because she really believed in me, and I learned the value of having a leader who didn't feel threatened by you, and really gave you the opportunity, gave you that stage as what and created that stage for you to perform. And that was a key lesson, and that stood me in good stead for when I've subsequently I worked in the US for a bit, and then back to the UK, and then went to Australia.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I mean, it's impressive. And I think now you've been CMO, you've taken client side roles, you've definitely progressed and gone through the ranks. When you look back now, do you feel that having that agency experience early on in your career was a solid, big tick for you? And I mean, would you recommend others to potentially go that way, or?
Yeah, great question. So I have a few views on this. So of course, I would say, because I've got to own my bias, that agency experience has stood me in good stead, right? Why do I say that? And I'll also give you some views on why that is perhaps not the case. I want to be trying to be as balanced as possible. So the reason I say that is a consultant or an agency person, let's say, is able to grasp things on average. This is a generalization, of course, there's always variance, very, very, very quickly. And they add value very, very, very quickly. I have noticed when I've been client side, people who do not have the agency experience and are client side are their pace is not there, their sense of urgency isn't there, and they just don't get it on average as quick. Of course, there are outliers, right? On the flip side, um, there is something important and valuable to be said for really having a considered point of view and being able to move at a pace which isn't like a velocity of 100 miles an hour, but is more considered, and bringing a business on the journey, right? Bringing your stakeholders on the journey, being patient with the way a business makes decisions, because everyone makes decisions differently. And those type of skills are really something that, of course, people who've been client side their whole life, they get that stakeholder management. And the other overlay I would add to that, Lucy, is agencies on the whole are specialists. They're really good at like that one corridor, or maybe quite a wide corridor of things. When you're client side, you are more generalist. And so I have seen it where it's difficult and challenging for people to go from agency side into a generalist client side role.
Yeah.
Having said that, I did do that myself, but it was challenging. So I guess
Well,
in some, I do feel like it's stood me in good stead. But I do have to catch myself because there are some very significant downsides as well. So you do have to be quite aware of those things.
yeah. Yeah. And I often find as well, certainly, when I've been hiring, if you've got hiring managers that have been and walked that walk, where they've also been agency side, they're a lot more open to getting, talent that's come from that sort of, that background as well. It's an interesting, it's an interesting conversation to have.
It is, and all I would say for your listeners, if they are hiring managers on the call, and listening, I would strongly suggest when you're dealing with exec search partners like Lucy or others, that I wouldn't make the brief prescriptive and go, they must be from client side, or indeed they must be from agency side. Like, we are all marketeers, all of us. And what I found quite interesting, moving from the UK, working in the US, then moving here to Australia, there is 100% this strange, I don't know, divide, let's call it. I've had client side marketers say to me off the record, "Oh, Liam, I avoid agency side like plague. I'm never doing that." And they seem to believe that they're some way down the supply chain, I guess. And I don't buy that. In the UK, I really was, because I learned the craft of marketing there and the trade there. I really understood the value of an agency and the value of a client who really understood how to get the best out of an agency, right? And the amount of super senior clients who have swapped between agency super senior, they've gone to different adjacent roles. Like in the UK, that's very common. I feel like Australia is a bit more parochial, a bit more conservative when it comes to that viewpoint.
Yeah, I would agree. Curious, maybe a little bit more of a personal question here, but have you always been, have you always had that ambition to get to, CMO or GM? Were you ever scared of becoming a leader?
Yeah, good question. The short answer is no.
Uh-huh.
Why though? I think leadership can be taught.
Uh,
Management can certainly be taught. Leadership can be taught, but to a lesser extent.
uh-huh.
I have always felt that my really, Lucy, if I was to write a one-line CV, my biggest skill, and the only skill that I'd say really matters, is I have a high level of empathy and emotional intelligence. That's really what I have.
Uh,
That's all.
uh-huh.
And the more senior you get in business, the more that matters more, because you are less removed. You actually have less control the more senior you are, which is bizarre, but you actually have less. And so I realized, I suppose, young on, that I was more tuned to this as a concept than others. And I had my first direct report when I was like 21.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh gosh, what do I do with, like, the poor guy? And so I definitely learned quickly that if you really don't consider people's thoughts, feelings, reactions, all the basics, then that can really land you in some awkward places, right? And so you can get some incredible output and learn and grow together if you leverage your emotional intelligence. And so that's why I knew early on that I had the leadership streak
Yeah.
in me, because I knew this was probably my overdeveloped skill. But then, having said that, Lucy, you know, I in the roles that I've subsequently got, I've constantly struggled because you oscillate between being an effective manager and being an effective leader.
Mhm.
And I would say that there is so much blurring of those two things, and
Yeah.
it's a mentally and energetically exhausting thing to move
Mm.
between being visionary,
Uh-huh.
leading in the truest sense, and being really bolted on, buttoned down on the process, the deliverables, and making sure we've got the right operational structure. And I guess from my experience in more senior roles, it's an exhausting kind of seesaw between those two things.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you've developed as a leader, I mean, you mentioned, one leader that you worked with before who, gave you that,
My first one
spotlight.
in marketing.
So yeah. So I mean, Would it be fair to say that you've also been inspired by other people around you and other leaders, and also I'm sure you've witnessed, some behaviours that you kind of go, well, I definitely don't want to be like that.
Yes, certainly. So look, it takes all sorts to make a world, Lucy. Is what I would say, and I guess being both managed and then being a manager has taught me a lot about myself. Right? And I've definitely experienced a very poor experience with a manager who was absolutely brilliant in delivering results. Like
Mhm.
just like I was in awe of this person, in awe.
Wow.
But at what cost?
Um,
And the means, in their mind, justified the end. And I definitely observed that there was a tolerance around that in the particular business that I was in, because the reality was is that the results were being delivered.
um,
And I took that as the lesson of, wow, I never want to be that person. But it was hard though, because at the time you're wrapped up in the need to deliver a commercial result, and it was coming, and so you kind of everyone turns a blind eye to that. So that was a real interesting learning experience for me. Uh,
uh,
and then
uh,
on the flip side, on a more positive experience, to answer the other part of your question,
um,
I've a leader I've had subsequent in my career. They taught me the value of simplicity.
yeah.
So not only when you get more senior, your emotional intelligence becomes more important, and you have less control. Ironically, the more important the value of just relentless simplicity.
Mhm.
If you cannot say it in two sentences, don't say it.
Yeah.
Because you need to be able to orchestrate your team, orchestrate the wider business. And if you can't create that reductive simplicity, you either don't understand it, you haven't defined the problem, or you don't have all the information. So,
Yeah.
and that was a really huge lesson for me, which was like leveling up.
Yeah, I think you've just nailed that when you say simplicity. I could say the same when, I've interviewed marketing directors or CMOs and I say, what have you done? And they've done 101 million things. But if I ask the question, what have you been tasked with doing when you took this role? I met with someone recently and they just like, again did what you did. Simplicity, it was in one sentence. I did da 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 da, and it was just I got it. And I thought, well, if I get it like that, my clients will. Perfect.
Yeah. Because, and that's the nub, isn't it, Lucy? Because here's the reality: in the information age that we live in,
Mm,
the stuff that travels the quickest and has the most impact is the simplest stuff.
mhm.
Not necessarily the most technically brilliant, not necessarily even the right answer for something.
Yeah.
It is in the stuff which is an easy get. That's
Yeah, exactly.
so
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So as you've developed, you become, as we said, more senior. You've got to. Have you had to work on personal branding? Like, has that been something that you've had to? And I know people kind of go, "Oh God, what's that word? What does that word mean?" But what does that word mean to you when we say personal brand?
Yeah. Good question. I think it means having a point of view.
Mm,
Is my first one. I remember it does make me laugh. My first boss, who I mentioned, who was awesome, and she's still one of my mentors today. And I remember she said to me before a client meeting, and it was so random. She was like, "Oh, Liam, do you know what you need? You need like a big pair of like lime green glasses or a statement blazer, something to like make you stand out, build your personal brand." And I think I was really cheeky and direct even back then. And I said to her, I was like, I don't think I need props to stand out. Like was my response. Uh, and reflecting on that, I definitely think, yeah, a point of view, as I said, is the thing. Like, stand for something in business and genuinely in life, right? Reflect your character should reflect things that you really passionately believe in. And in our industry, what my I believe my point of view is, and you do have to be relentless and simple and consistent in this point of view, is I'm interested in initiatives that really professionalize our industry. What I
Yeah.
loved about the law was that it was a really solid profession. There were like these hallmarks of being a lawyer, like your set pathway, specific things you had to do, like external accreditation. There was a value to the profession. Moving into marketing, it's like the Wild West.
Yeah.
And that's both annoying, let's be honest, but it's
Mhm.
also a great source of opportunity. And I choose to see the opportunity more than I see the annoyance. And so
Mhm.
my personal brand, I believe, is about anything which is helping professionalize our industry, creating codification, creating more evidence about
Yeah.
the things that we do. Because if I do that, that doesn't just help me in my career, that raises the bar, the tide rises for everyone. And so that's something I hope and believe my personal brand is about.
Mhm.
And then aside from that, Lucy, I think everyone has a distinct communication style and preferences. And as I said earlier, I'm very direct. I don't shy away from an awkward conversation. I'm pretty cheeky. And that's the things that should just come out if you can bring
Yeah.
your whole self to work. I hope that people can bring their whole selves to work. That's a broader conversation on the way that workplace practices are evolving.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think lots of valid points there. In terms of, I guess, everything you've learned now that you are, at the height of where you've been, and as I said, taking these senior roles in the past, when you look back, is there any, like, what advice would you give to, say, your 28-year-old self?
Yeah, probably two things.
Mm,
I personally probably leaned in a bit too much into the like being hardcore like at work. Like I used to work weekends to get something done ahead of the deadline, and I was and like this was pretty regular because I was so committed to a good outcome. I think I would tell my 28-year-old self, actually, if you're doing it, that probably means you haven't delegated it effectively. You're trying to be the hero,
mm,
and you're not probably being a team player. So
mhm,
think about that, because in business, you achieve nothing alone. So that's probably
mm,
the first advice I would give, because I think the narrative around youth are people more youthful than myself and just youthful generations like Gen Z, Gen Alpha. I think there's this I believe there's this narrative of, you've just got to work so hard to succeed. You've got to put in all the hours.
yeah,
You've got to beat everyone else. You've got to be like this piranha at work, and I don't buy that.
yeah,
And I think the problem is that narrative is quite dominant. So how do we create a more collegiate mentality around success? So that would be my first advice I would give. And the second one, I think it would be a bit more patience, because I do think I was pretty bullish to want to try client side as quickly as possible, because
yeah,
I wanted the next challenge, and I'm I'm an impatient person, and I do feel there's a level of impatience that people have as they go up through their careers.
yeah,
The older I get, the more I learn that actually a career is not a linear journey. It's an adjacent journey. It's sometimes a step down. Heaven forbid you've got to take a step down, right? Like, but life happens, and you've got to be able to have patience
mm,
as long as you're growing, or if you're teaching, mentoring, and coaching others,
mhm,
still adding tremendous value, and you're still growing as a person anyway by doing those things. So I think a healthy level of patience would also have stood me in better stead. So they're the two things I would have said. Don't think about the collegiate mentality of success, and then a bit more
mm.
patience would be some advice.
I think that's well answered. I think I would also be on the patient. I'd be in the patient bucket as well. That's for sure. Not very patient. I want to ask as well. So I do speak to a lot of individuals who, let's call it, mid management level. They're at that, period in their career where they're starting to think, well, I might be on that sort of 140, 150 mark. But I really want to get to the 180, 200 plus. And it can be a really hard, window to break through
Yeah,
nowadays and, the economy and what we're seeing. And there's a lot that I think in doing it very much because, it's in their view, it's the only way they're going to make that 200K plus mark. But then, I do try and sort of give them that option and say, well, look, you can still earn a really decent living, but you don't have to manage teams, because it's almost until you've actually done it and been there, that's when you're managing a team. And then people go, oh God, what have I signed up for? Like, this isn't what I want to do. So what advice, in a long roundabout question, what advice would you give someone who's really starting to think about, well, actually, now I want to go for the top stop. This is where I want, what would you say to them? You
Yeah.
need to be prepared for.
Well, be careful what you wish for. And then I'd share an anecdote, which is, I spent most of my years in middle management wanting a bigger team, and then when I got a bigger team, all I wanted to do was kind of get rid of my direct reports, right? So, yeah. So like, this is the beauty and the sting of business, right? People, human capital, that is the thing which is all that matters in business. And I think we have this overlay at the moment with technology being so important. Of course, AI, of course, I've got to say,
Yeah.
being so important. Yes, but at the end of the day, it's still about people. And if you are in a middle, like, management level role between the brackets that you talked about there, my advice is, think about, instead of trying to collect people and departments or capabilities, think about the ongoing legacy that you can leave for your business. So, for example, have they ever done a brand campaign before? Do they need a new marketing technology suite? They need to do an audit for that. Think about projects that you can put yourself to that perhaps aren't even in your direct scope, perhaps they're slightly adjacent to, which you can go, I want to actually run and own this, and I will put in the hours to wrangle stakeholders, to get suppliers on the hook, to deliver the commercial business case. And if you do things like that, you're showing that you're not only committed to your business, but you're more concerned about legacy rather than collecting pieces on a chessboard in like a Game of Thrones kind of fashion.
Yeah.
If you do that, you go to point to that and go, that was something that I delivered commercially off my own back, with this support, without this support. That is more valuable and more interesting as a hiring manager when I've hired clients on the hiring agency side than people saying, oh, I've managed a budget of 20 million. I've had a team of 14. Uh, uh, I don't care. I care about what incremental commercial return you've delivered. And if you've been a nice person whilst doing it, and not burn everyone on the way. So that's some of the advice I would give.
Yeah. Thank you. Do you see the future of the CMO role changing? Because, if you think, looking at the mid-management level in, say, I don't know, maybe 5 years or 8 years time, these people might get to that. Like, I mean, I'm seeing these titles now. I think we even touched on this, chief growth officer, and all these. How do you see that? Do you see it's almost changing or sitting within a different function in the future?
So I was speaking with a very reputable exec search partner in the UK, because I've still got lots of connections in the UK. And they said to me that, Liam, we don't even use the word marketing now in the briefs that we get for marketing type roles, because it sniffs of unaccountability and lack of commerciality. We're actually talking about chief customer officers, chief experience officers, right? And so that was really interesting. So is the marketing role dead? Who knows? But I won't go into that subject. So I do think that we are already seeing that disruption of the CMO role. You only need to look at the way in which marketing technology has risen in importance. Of course, the importance of the Metas and Googles of this world. Technology and marketing is now one and the same thing. The challenge we have with that technology comes a massive legal compliance regulatory burden, which marketers are now rapidly trying to upskill on. And not only that, post COVID, my opinion of what's happened there is, to the CMO role, budgets have never been rebased to anything like they were pre-COVID. They were, of course, cut, and they were never based back to where they should have been proportionally or otherwise. And so now marketers have been drawn more into the world of finance, which is a good thing. But same time, they've been dragged into the regulatory burdens of technology, which is now the same thing with the marketing profession now. So the role of the CMO has never been more confused. The CMOs I speak to when I was a CMO, whilst I worked in brilliant businesses, I was so lucky to work in the business I worked in. It was nevertheless still challenging. Like you are constantly proving value, and I was had good experiences with my client side companies. I know of other CMOs who are not having good experiences where every day it is trying to justify the value, and everyone's still having an opinion on marketing, which as a profession, every day is still so different given technology is one and the same thing with marketing. So the role has changed fundamentally. And I actually don't think in the future we will have CMOs. I think it will be at the top of the tree for marketing will be chief
Customer officer.
chief experience officer. I don't even think I think marketing as a a name for our profession probably be phased out, and it will be growth marketing, product marketing as more splinters off of that.
When you've progressed and developed, was there any, I guess, thought leaders, or would you advise any, marketing managers out there to read a specific? Is there anything that really grabbed you? TED Talks, any resources that you'd say, you know what, I'd definitely recommend jumping on board this?
Yeah. So I was very fortunate. I was part of I am part of the Marketing Academy alumni. So that's an amazing development course, if I can call it that. It's so much more than just a development course, though. And through that, when I was on that cohort in 2020, I experienced an enormous array of incredible thought leaders and coaches who really inspired or provoked me on my journey. So check out the Marketing Academy is my short answer. But outside of that, there's one book I always come back to by John Kay called Obliquity, which is essentially about how if you want to achieve something, the best way to get there is actually indirectly. It's more a lesson for life. And that lesson has stood me in a lot of good stead over my years on this earth. So I'd recommend that. And then the final thing I would say is you are firmly in charge of your own career. Don't expect anyone else to do it for you. You are not just in the driver's seat. You are the car. You are the engine, right? You are it. So you have to go and find the things that speak to you, because there's not a shortage of content out there. You're going to go to some talks. They're going to be crap. You're going to go to some. You're going to be like, that was weird. Then you're going to find some that are genuinely like, wow, this really speaks to me. So it's your job to give your brain some food and go and experience that. So be provocative. Go out there and attend. There's so much out there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, my final question. I've so enjoyed listening to you. Honestly, I feel like I could just listen to another hour, but we've got one more question.
Oh, no, we'll listen to that. No.
What would be your lasting legacy that you'd hope to leave in the industry? I know you're not dead yet, but
no, not yet. I would love to be able to contribute to the industry, per what I said earlier, and have played a role of some sort in creating a shared professional pathway into our industry. So, in all universities, there's a syllabus or curriculum which isn't just academic but super practical, right? And we have some type of formalized way to get into our industry. So we have standardized skill sets at every level of our industry. So when you're recruiting for a marketing manager, know the skill sets. When you're recruiting for someone who's a consultant in an agency business, these are the skill sets. If I could contribute to that, I feel like we would have a better economic output as an industry. We'd be taken, for want of a better word, more seriously in corporate Australia. And thirdly, I'd love to do that to help Australia and ANZ have more of a heavyweight punch when it comes to our industry on a global scale. So that's what I'd love to be able to contribute.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you're over halfway there. I have no doubt. Well, Liam, thank you so much for your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you. I think, our listeners are going to find this so fascinating. I know you're quite active on LinkedIn, so I'm sure perhaps if anyone wants to reach out to you, be
More
welcome
than
to connect.
welcome. I mean, for my personal brand, I have to be on LinkedIn, right? I don't have lime green glasses, so I've got to do something. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Remember, the road to CMO isn't always linear. It's filled with challenges, decisions, and moments of transformation. Whether you're charting your course or navigating a career shift, the experiences, wisdom shared today, as with our guests, is invaluable. Thank you for joining us. Keep dreaming big, keep pushing boundaries, and remember that your journey towards becoming a CMO is as much about the destination as it is about the growth you experience along the way. Until next time, continue to innovate, evolve, and carve out your path to CMO.